We need to move on. Where's the pastor? Where's it in the text? Well, when Jesus is rejected in verse 34, it doesn't really tell us how he responded. And I believe that Jesus is a brother, and it did not make sense to me because you and I both know if that was you and I in the text, we'd have been cussing some town people out. We would have at least found those pig farmers that lied on us and we'd have got even with them. But I'm looking, it did not say what he said when he was rejected. That's why I let Spirit breathe across the text, and Spirit let me know that preacher, the response is there. It's just not in chapter 8. Get this. Chapter 8, verse 34 says, when the whole town went out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they pleaded with him to leave their region. I thought that there ought to be a verse 35, 36, 37. Ought to be something that he said in response to them. But his response to rejection came in chapter 9, verse 1. Says Jesus stepped into a boat, crossed over, and came to his own town. You missed it. You got to learn how to move on. Look at somebody tell you got to learn how to move on, move on, move on. Maybe your problem is that you're sticking around verse 8, 34, trying to prove to people who don't want you that you ain't going nowhere, trying to make people want you when they told you they already don't want you. But I came to tell you, as long as you stay where people don't want you, you'll never be where God has destined you to be. You got to know how to move on. Where is that in the text, Pastor? Let me show you. Because if you keep on reading, you'll figure out that there was a paralyzed man that Jesus meets in chapter 9 that he never would have met had he stayed in chapter 8. There was a disciple named Matthew that needed some direction in chapter 9 that he never would have met had he stayed in chapter 8. There was a woman with an issue of blood in chapter 9 that he never would have met had he stayed in chapter 8. There was a little girl who was laying on her deathbed in chapter 9 that he never would have healed if he had stayed in chapter 8. There were two blind men that needed their sight back in chapter 9. He never would have gave that to them if he had stayed in chapter 8. Jesus does not stick around trying to defend what he has done in his word. He wasn't looking for acceptance when he was rejected. He got in the boat and he kept it moving. You got to learn how to move on. Look at somebody, tell them, move on. You cannot stick around with stuck people in stuck places trying to change them. You're in a stuck place with stuck people who are stuck in their ideas and stuck on not being unstuck. You got to stop wasting your time, your money, your resources. You got to go ahead and leave them stuck on stupid people alone. You got to learn how to move on. I'm on the field. Let me cut across right here. I have been preaching for 20 years. And I have had the privilege of preaching all over. I preached in London several times. I preached in Africa. I preached all over this country. And I know that after 20 years, I got a few sermons that'll work anywhere. After 20 years, I know I can preach. Even though I might not have did much today, I know I can preach when I want to. I got a few sermons that'll go. But I have gone to some places where my preaching didn't fit in. My style of homiletical presentation wasn't it for them. Didn't have anything to do with the kind of Bible I was preaching out of. Didn't have anything to do with my content. It was just the way that I presented it. It wasn't getting it for them. And when I was young in ministry, that used to bother me. I always wanted to go back to those churches where my sermon didn't work, try to find another sermon that'll make them smile, shout, and want me to come back again. But thank God I have learned how to move on. And when I get to a place where my little sermon don't work, I put my notes back in my Bible, I head on out of there. I don't get depressed, I don't cry no river, I don't go somewhere and want to sit down. What I do is I get back in my boat, I head Amen.